In this video, we talk about the code section of the standard surface shader. For now, let's zero out the base weight. Right now, only the specular section contributes to the shader. We can set its roughness to 0.35 and set the coat weight to 1. Think of the coat section as a second specular layer that coats the entire material. The second specular layer or coat can be used however you want to add a very sharp, clear coat on top of everything, like for a car paint, or to add an overall sharper specular reflection on top of the main specular reflection to make the specular lobe look more realistic. Now remember that the coat contribution will sit on top of every other shading effect except for cutout opacity, like base, specular, transmission, SSS, bump, or normal mapping. Coat weight controls the amount of reflective coating on top of other shading effects, and as I increase it, you see how these sharper specular reflections are being added on top of our main specular reflections. Right now, the main specular layer roughness is 0.35 and the coat roughness is set to 0.1. Roughness controls how sharp or rough you want the coating layer to be. And if I set the roughness to be 0, now we get a very sharp, clear coat on top of our rougher specular reflections, which looks very cool. Coat color sets the color of the coating layer, and this normally should be white. We have coat IOR, and this controls the Fresnel reflectivity of the coat layer. We talked about the Fresnel reflectivity in the specular video a few lessons back. Here in the coat section, think of it like this. Where do I want the coat to appear on the surface? If I use something like 1.1 to get a strong Fresnel effect, the coat contribution will be less visible on the frontal faces to the viewing direction and becomes stronger as the faces become more perpendicular to the viewing direction. And if I set the IOR to something like 1.5 or 1.6 to get a weaker Fresnel effect, now the coat will become more visible on the parallel faces to the viewing direction as well as the perpendicular faces. For more advanced shaders that I work on, I always have some contribution from the coat layer. If you take a look at a plastic toy or almost anything else in real world, the reflections on the perpendicular faces are not only stronger, but they are also sharper. You can use the coat layer with a low IOR value like 1.2 to simulate that, or you can use the coat layer for more obvious reasons like a metallic car paint or any other clear coating on top of your shader. Coat, anisotropy, and rotation are working like the ones in the specular section. So if I set the roughness to something like 0.1 or 0.2 or higher, and now increase the anisotropy and anisotropy rotation, we can get more directional coating if that's what you want. For now, set them back to 0. Next, we have this coat normal parameter. I mentioned that the coat sits on top of all the shading effects, including bump and normal mapping. Let's quickly add some bump mapping to the overall shader. I'm going to add a noise node. Set its scale to around 100. Add a bump 2D node. And set the noise as the bump map. And now connect the bump 2D node to the geometry normal input of the shader. Now the bump affects the entire shader except for the coating layer. So if you want to add normal or bump mapping to the coat layer as well, you need to use the normal input in the coating section. Let me disconnect the bump 2D node from the shader and connect it instead of the coat normal input. And set the bump height to something like 0.1 centimeters. And now as you can see, we are affecting the coat layer. Uses for coat normal could be a bumpy coat layer over a smoother base like a rain effect, a carbon fiber shader, or a car paint shader where you could use a flake shader to add the flakes to the car paint shader. Regarding car paint shader, we used to use the standard surface shader to create car paint shaders, but as Arnold has an incredibly powerful and dedicated car paint shader, we no longer use the standard surface shader for that purpose. So that's about the code section of the standard surface shader. See you in the next video.